You ready to go?
We're rolling.
We're going to start. Would you give us your name and your title here at the college?
Okay, Thomas Ask, Professor of Industrial and Human Factors Design.
Welcome, everyone, to the very first episode of the Workingclass podcast. My name is Chris Lay, and I'm the director-editor of the Workingclass television program. Workingclass is a partnership between the Pennsylvania College of Technology in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and WVIA, the PBS affiliate out of Wilkes-Barre, Scranton. Our program explores and connects students, parents, and educators with 21st century career opportunities. And see, the thing is, when we produce our show, there's always a lot of good stuff that is left on the cutting room floor, so to speak. And this podcast is a way for us to share the conversations we have with some really interesting, talented, and smart people. Today, Elaine Lambert, the creator, producer, and writer of Workingclass, sits down with Tom Ask, industrial design professor at Penn College. And I actually pop in towards the end and ask a few questions too. Tom has designed dozens of commercialized products and systems during his almost 20 years in industry. He enjoys the process of creation, and his research interests include ethnographically based design. Tom is a licensed professional engineer and served as a visiting professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Technology in Malaysia in 2009. He holds degrees from the University of Illinois, Cornell, Excelsior College, and he earned his doctorate at Middlesex University in London. Tom and Elaine talk about creativity and the importance of play when it comes to creativity, our connection to the objects around us. He talks about sustainable design, 3D printing, and a whole lot more. I think you'll agree that Tom is very passionate about design, as well as sharing that passion with his students. Here's Tom and Elaine.
Tom, what inspired your creativity when you were a child?
As a child, my creativity was motivated largely by play, by taking the things that were laying around the house or outside, putting them together in fanciful and wonderful ways, and just finding joy from play. So that was really the catalyst for my pursuit of the creative disciplines.
Good. You had mentioned to me when we had our first conversation that you became interested in the space program as a child. What effect did that, and you want to describe that era a little bit for us? Sure. And what effect that had on you? Right,
the space program was a magical thing for a boy. I mean, it really was. It was big fire, big noise, big machines, going to this place that was far away and scary and something you can only imagine. So in my provincial upbringing in Illinois, that just seemed like a fantastic thing. And it was done by people using slide rules and science and using pads of paper and thick books, and they made that happen, and that was just utter magic to me.
Great. How did you start then to kind of connect those creative interests that you had as a child with the idea of work later in life?
Yeah, the connection between creativity and my work was always natural. And what happens is often many are motivated to make a living, and we need to make money. And so my interest in science and creativity led to design and inventiveness. And then I looked at professions that connected with that. And really the applied sciences are often a refuge for people who are looking for a regular job, a steady paycheck, an interesting job, but one that seems within reach. So that's what connected those together. And when I saw that you could use science in concert with creative pursuits in the form of design, I thought that was fantastic. In fact, my first job as a co-op student was to design something, and I was just happier than a pig in mud. It was just what I wanted to do, and I was almost 19. I was very young, and I thought, this is wonderful.
You described when we met earlier, go ahead. You described coming from a working class background. How do you think that influenced your thinking about college and about career when you were young?
Yeah, my parents came from Norway, and they came fairly soon after the war. They were raised during the German occupation, so they had a really different upbringing than did I. But they came to this country for economic gain largely, and we ended up in Illinois. even though we did go back to Norway for a period of time, which was unusual because we had to bow to our teachers when they arrived in the room, and we had school 6 days a week, and a lot of interesting things that an American boy was not familiar with at all. But for me, my parents really had no formal education. My father was a carpenter, my mother was at home. And I aspired to greatness, as do all young people, I hope. And that aspiration then made me look at careers that seemed to resonate with my interest. It looked to financial concerns, which made me look at state university systems and things like that. So my upbringing really kept me focused on getting a good job efficiently, quickly, in a sense. And I saw the path. The path was clear. It was going through college and going through that route. That allowed me to achieve my dreams. But my parents, it was interesting. They didn't necessarily motivate us. We had 5 children. They didn't necessarily motivate us to go to, or encourage us anyway, to go to college. But they were very open to whatever we might want to do. And college seemed to be the best avenue for that.
Very good, very good. A lot of people, when they hear the word design, they think about the visual appeal of objects. But when we talked earlier, you talked about design as function being as important in design as visual appeal. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, the importance of both visual appeal and function?
Yeah, visual appeal and function are interrelated in a way. I mean, at the end of the day, you want something to work. If you buy something or make something that doesn't work, it's obviously a fruitless pursuit. But humans are very complicated. We don't just want things that work. We surround ourselves with things of natural beauty, whether it be rings or art or clothing of various colors. So we want to surround ourselves with, with beauty, and we protect beauty. We put beauty in museums. We don't step on butterflies, but we step on cockroaches with alacrity. So there's a special connection with beauty. It doesn't necessarily mean pretty, and the whole concept of beauty is very complex, but there's something beyond the technical, beyond the mechanistic that is alluring to people. And that allure is really the art of design. So designers have to make things that work. They have to work well and efficiently and intuitively, and even be predictive in the way that they anticipate how the user might use the product. So they have to look at safety. So if somebody can take something you design and hurt themselves or someone else with it, as a designer, it's incumbent upon you to say, wait a second, we've got to get rid of that feature, or we need to dull that edge, or we need to make that part not move, or we need to do something to make a part intrinsically safe. So a designer is looking down these threads of usage, from normal usage to inadvertent usage to other types of usages, but we're also surrounding the product with elements of material culture. You know, people don't go to see the Mona Lisa because they want to wait in a long line and peek their head over a head of tourists. You know, they go there to connect perhaps with Leonardo da Vinci. You know, is the Mona Lisa that beautiful? It's maybe not. Maybe it is. But it certainly connects with the material culture that we want to tie into. So we think of Petrarch's rebellion against the church as he saw it, and tying into the wisdom of the ancients to incite the Renaissance, and somehow we feel connected with that humanist movement. You can make those kind of arguments that our material culture is really important in the products that we look at too. So when we deal with a product, we want to be connected with our culture or with our family. It could be, in fact, an act of filial piety, that we revere some silver set or something that our grandmother gave our mother, and these kind of things. So objects have a lot more value than just their functional use. But you have to get the functional right. You have to make it work in unique ways sometimes. So, for example, just like good poetry, surprise is really appealing. People love surprise. You push a button and something interesting happens. You open a drawer and something odd happens. You look at something from a different angle and you see something different. And people love surprise. And you can infuse that into product design as well. So that's the layer, and it's a very complex layer that goes on top of this functional, sort of engineering-oriented sort of thing. And that's really what design is. That's what really where design takes off and carries its weight, is looking at these what are called non-mechanistic, these things that are hard to describe. We know them when we see them, we appreciate them when we see them, we sometimes don't even know what we want, but when we see it, we like it. And so a designer is looking forward beyond how to open a can of corn and that sort of thing, how to make a car go from here to the mall. They're looking far beyond that and trying to surround that object with many things that are of appeal. And appeal, a good example is something that's not beautiful, you might say, are certain vehicles that don't look attractive, but they have this sense of power, or they have a sense of connection with some sort of brand identity, which is a big issue, or some sort of community. For example, an aircraft carrier is not beautiful, but if you look at it, you get a response, you get a visceral response. You see the power infused in it, and that has its own appeal. So again, appeal, I like to use the word appeal over beauty. So that's sort of one element of design that designers work with. But again, they recognize material culture. What does this culture enjoy? What do they appreciate? Do they hand off this item to their children? Do they throw it in the garbage can when they're done with it? Do they recycle it? These are all elements. And actually, I could go on further, including designers consider sustainability. They consider, what do I do with this thing when it's at the end of its life? And they even look forward to ask the question, ideally, what is this product made from? Where does it come from? What are the social and economic impacts of extracting these raw ingredients and putting them into this product? And then you have the downstream issue of how do you take out the valuable recyclable things, the aluminum and the copper alloys, and how do you get rid of the nasty stuff and keep that out of landfills? And so that's sort of the complexity of professional design. Different than good ideas or pretty pictures.
Right. As you were talking, I was thinking that's I think what education brings to this field. We may, as a kid, like to sit and doodle, and I'm thinking of my goddaughter who's in your program now, who Ashley always liked to draw. She always liked to sketch out fashion designs and do things like that. I think in coming to the program, she begins to see, there's more that you can do. There's more. Can you speak a little bit about that? Like, how do you as an educator kind of open that door for somebody who really just comes to the program because they think they like to draw and do things? How do you open that door and help them learn more of these complexities?
Yeah, that's a good point. The people that have natural abilities or natural, what am I trying to think of here? People that have certain skills or attributes, they look to the wide horizon of their careers and they ask, what can I do with this? If I like to doodle, or if I like to draw or paint, or if I just have all these great ideas in my mind, what do I do with them? And most people love children, we'll say, who have these great ideas. I mean, it's just this raw creativity that we sometimes feel has left us, but we love it, we appreciate it, but what do you do with it? How do you get a paycheck from something like that? And that's a big question. And part of that is hard work. In other words, you can't make a living doodling. But if you have a propensity to doodle, a propensity to create, if you are a creator to the extent that you want to pursue it as a profession, in education what we do is we don't produce that creativity in you. That's presumptuous. You come in with that raw ingredient. What we try to do is give you tools and give you structure and give you a framework for taking that ability and that passion, because really it's rooted even more deeply into passion. Passion is perhaps more important than skill, to a large extent because of technology. But we take that passion and say, you know what, why don't you try this? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do these exercises? Why don't you think about this mind model? Why don't you draw this composition in this sort of formal sense? Why don't you work with these colors and see what happens? Why don't you experiment with this palette and see what happens? Why don't you try this mechanism? Why don't you try to build something really complicated just with wood and connects and foam core and all sorts of things? Just try to build without this sort of linear process of creation. And that's what educators can help with, is creating an environment that says, you know what, you're creative, you're with a bunch of creative people, we value creativity, we want to not create creativity in you, but rather extract it, and then couple it to the professional side, which in some ways is more it's more linear, it's more direct, namely things like consumer behavior, brand identity, understanding CAD systems and other kind of rendering systems. I mean, that's the sort of nuts and bolts thing you need to take your wonderful ideas and your passions and turn them into a professional product. Because design is not the fine arts. Design is not about self-expression. And it's about reflecting the paying client's desire for a product. Or if you're in the inventive mode, your sense for what the market wants. But it's not you just expressing yourself fully. But that expressing yourself is part of it. But you need to layer many skills on top of that. And they're important, and they're hard work, and they take focus and dedication that go beyond just doodling. But doodling is as compulsory is our tagline. So we keep that close to our chest.
Good. What are some of the ways that students, in some of these projects that you're talking about, what are some of the ways the students acquire the information and the data that they might need to fully understand consumer needs before they start to design a product?
Well, that's a very well understood discipline, and it's often in the management school, which students in design need to understand management. When we convened our needs assessment committee for this program, for example, the experts that we brought in from the discipline said you have to understand how things are made, how they're marketed, and how they're processed, how they're sold, the business side of things. So consumer behavior is often approached ethnographically. That's one way to do it, where you study people, you look at their, not at what they say necessarily, although that's certainly an ethnographic method, but what they actually do and what they value. And you try to couple it with quantitative data. Where is their money going? Where are they buying their houses? Where are they sending their kids? What is their cash to purchase ratio? That sort of thing. So you can sort of quantify consumer behavior. But part of it is qualitative. It's psychology, it's sociology, understanding brand identity. It's fascinating. People often connect with a brand identity. They'll say, I am like that person in the glossy magazine or in the TV ad, and I want to acquire those things that I see surrounding that person. And it's a very powerful factor. You see it strongly in many areas. You see it in sports is a real big area where people have these affiliations that aren't connected at all with their day-to-day life, but they have these strong affiliations and they put bumper stickers on their car or whatever. But you get this with consumer products as well. I am whatever, you fill in the blank. Apple's very good at that. And they create a culture that's not just financial, but it's social. And you have to understand that. So if you do something wrong, something that interrupts the brand identity, you really cause trouble for the brand. Now some brands, a good example I think is Lamborghini, they have certain visual design cues that they stick to, sort of geometric forms. And so you can get the visual brand connections, and you can get these sort of social brand connections. It's a very complicated science, understanding this. And fortunately, we can tap into the social sciences, which we do.
What are some, and I think you just mentioned a few, but what are some designs that you believe have stood the test of time?
Well, design is a fascinating thing because time is a good measure of success. So there's some designs that I wish I had invented, and they have held up over time in a powerful way. My favorite is a bicycle. Bicycles are used in so many formats, and they've done so many good things for people. And I won't belabor that, but a bicycle is just a wonderful machine. I think a pencil. Imagine what a pencil has done for people in terms of allowing them to express themselves. I like scissors. Scissors are a great example. It's simple, but do you think 200 years from now we might still have scissors that look a lot like they do now? Some designs are they're stripped down to their simplest components, and again, scissors are a good example of that. I have some personal, affection for things like sailboats, the magic of having the wind propel you in some way, and those have not changed much over the years. So those are some examples of designs that have lasted over time.
Very good. You've talked about this a bit in general terms, but maybe a little bit more specifically, what is it that attracts us to particular items, be they tools or consumer items or heirlooms? What is it that draws us to specific items?
Yeah, we're attracted to specific items for a variety of reasons. That if you could ever define perfectly, you would be at the end of time, perhaps. It's an ongoing question. Why do things appeal to people? It's an important question financially. It's an important question philosophically, and some elements of that have been understood well. A good example is filial piety, where you try to honor your family by honoring artifacts, and obviously that extends to traditions and other things. But here we're talking about products, but it could be experiences. So filial piety is important. We look to honor our past in a way, and the whole notion of material culture, where we connect value to things that transcend its actual usage. Our attics are full of things like that often, of things that we don't dare throw away, we value, we love, but we don't need. And on the other hand, it can be an experience. Apple is very good at packaging, for example. So the revealing of your new Apple whatever is something people enjoy. It's an experience they enjoy. They enjoy the shopping experience. The shopping experience can be a very important part of the acquisition. When people go out to buy something, they want to have a result. They don't want to invest 3 hours or whatever of time and not come back with anything. So you're drawn to the consumer environment by virtue of the time that you invested into it. So it really, that's a hard question to answer shortly.
Let's step into the computer era a little bit here, and let's talk about, first, how did designers work before computers came into the workplace, and then how has the job of the designer changed because of the computer?
Yeah, computers have done wonderful things for design. It's interesting to look back to see how things were in the past, because what we did in the past is still important now. So let me just talk about that briefly. Namely, we used pencils and markers and other media. We had a range of different pencils with different, from our 4H's up to our HB's and so on. We were experts with these, and we could control line width and darkness and so on with our pencils. We used markers for color, and the reason I think it's interesting to note that is because that's still very human. The notion of drawing with a pencil or a pen or a marker is very human. We're in control of the environment. We're not having to subordinate our actions to anything. We can draw on cave walls, we can draw on scrap pieces of paper, and we're completely unencumbered. So it's still a very, very important part of the design process is drawing. In fact, studies have verified that people, when they work on concepts, enjoy pencil and paper drawing. But technology, what technology has done for us is a lot of exciting things. One of the issues, and this could be contentious, is color work. So now you can render things monochromatically and do all your color work digitally, which means you can develop a whole range of color schemes very easily, without any loss of fidelity from your original drawing. So you can work with color, but also too you can use certain programs to help you with the drawing process. So if you can't draw a straight line, and this is where technology helps people that can't draw a straight line, which probably form a club with us, but there are programs that can really dress up your work and force symmetry and do some nice things in terms of just raw sketching. And then, of course, it moves on to other technical areas. For example, surface rendering, where you can do some really exquisite and complex shapes, which is a fascinating technology. And there's parametric modeling, so that allows you to not only work with form, but connect properties to that form. So you can do a lot of engineering work with it, too. And you can do some really complex optics with it. So it's just amazing what you can do with this software. But there's a caveat there. Namely, you can make anything look beautiful with some of the rendering software that we have. So you can take a bowling ball and make it look absolutely exquisite, but in fact it's not. It's a trick of color and light and reflection and all these things. Also, technology is leading us down other roads in the 3D world, which in design, at least my type of design, is in the 3D world. So 3D printers have been around for a long time. This notion of additive manufacturing is here to stay and is doing wonderful things. But also we can scan sculpted images into the digital realm. So we can take two-dimensional drawings, bring them into the digital world. We can take 3D form, bring them into the digital world. And that's nice because humans draw and they sculpt. Our working with stylus and mouse and so on, that's something we're doing to interface with technology. And that's a moving target. At the end of the day, we create with our hands and our mind, that sort of combination. So we don't want to subordinate that to the machine. But it's done good things in those, especially those areas, color and giving us aids to sculpting and drawing.
I know in your program, some of the foundational courses are things like drawing, like color. Why are those basics still so important in this technological age? Why is it so important that students still do that hands-on pen-to-paper work?
Yeah, art foundations are important in design because they connect you with a history, for one. And if you have in a respect for the history of design, you sort of partake in that. And that can be very frustrating for people. But we'll say the formal art courses teach you some really interesting things. They teach you to master the media so that you're in control of what's going on and you're not going along for the ride with the technology. So for example, in drawing courses, you can control value and texture very well. You learn about composition. And composition is a funny thing because there are many compositional rules, and they work. And why they work is really hard to explain, but they do work. If you break some of the compositional rules, your designs don't work, and it's really amazing how that is. But also you develop a design language, which is important for talking to other professionals. So all disciplines have language, and our language is different, but it works. And also, in terms of formal art study, color is very important, and understanding what color is and all the constituents of color are critical. So these are why some of these traditional courses are part of the curriculum.
You talked about 3D printing, and we're going to be filming in Eric Albert's lab next week.
Good. He's really an expert with that.
So there is this growing interest in, as you mentioned, 3D scanning. How does that, can you describe from the designer's perspective what 3D printing and scanning does, how it contributes to your ability to design a product?
Sure. 3D printing lets us look at models very quickly. We can develop digital files and send them out to be printed so we can see what they look like. That's one use of 3D printing. It gives us a rapid modeling technique. But 3D printing is used for a lot more than that. So for example, you can make small parts or any kind of part that you need to finish out a design. You can share data between different users all over the world. So I can send you a file which contains information on a part that I can print out. So it allows a lot of collaborative work too. That's really a long list as to what 3D printing can do. I mean, some of the obvious things is it lets you do short runs. You can print a handful of parts or one part, and you can make it perfect and just the way you want. The other side of 3D printing, if you look at 3D scanning, that's in some ways more intriguing from the design standpoint because it says I can take the human form and I can scan it and I can create clothing for that person that fits perfectly, that fits that person. So I take this physical form and I digitize it and I can do wonderful things with it that way. And in the same fashion, I can take sort of the pure art approach and sculpt something and put that into the digital world and print it out. If I'm designing a bicycle helmet, I can scan in and I want to sculpt it. So I get a mannequin's head and I sculpt a beautiful bicycle helmet. And I can put that into the digital world, but it's all done by hand. And in other words, I created the design. And the only thing I'm doing with the digital side of things is assuring symmetry and actually putting it, and doing some other good things that are important. But the actual creative side, the visual side, I'm doing by hand just like a sculptor.
Mm-hmm. As we think about innovation, am I correct that 3D printing kind of started out as a way of making prototypes more than, and now it's kind of evolved into this real end product, customized end product? Is that correct?
Well, my first dealings with 3D printing were in the late 80s, and we made a turbine rotor to check on fit, and it was a big deal. Stereolithography was a big issue then. And what's happened is it's become more approachable to a lot of people. It's gotten cheaper, it's gotten faster, it's gotten better, and it's letting people do all sorts of amazing things. So it's been around for a long time in many ways, but you're certainly seeing a big swell right now. And it lets people have their own manufacturing plant in their kitchen. So it's sort of the democratization of manufacturing.
Is the ratio of the final part to just prototypes? It's still more on the prototype
Yes,
side.
right.
Is that what?
Yeah, as far as I don't know where that will lead to, but right now, I guess Eric Albert would know more about this than I would. But generally, the 3D printing is used more for prototyping than final products because they're slow. They're slow.
But the future
Right. The future might lend itself certainly to more manufacturing on demand. I mean, that's the idea. I want this part. you get it manufactured when you need it and where you need it, whether it's in the space shuttle or in your garage, you can get that part manufactured. And that perhaps is where it will end up.
And you mentioned something to me about maybe healthcare, the healthcare industry being one that will benefit greatly from that.
Right. The healthcare industry is unique because it's growing quickly, and it's one that is very intimately connected with people. And so when you deal with people, you're not dealing with equations and such. You're dealing with something that's a little more genteel. And one area that healthcare needs is customization. If you're getting a prosthetic device, it's got to fit perfectly, or you want it to fit perfectly. So 3D scanning and 3D printing too can do some good things. So you can scan in a stump and get a perfect match for it, and then you can do certain technical things to make sure you can attach to it and such, and then use 3D printing to print out one-off copies.
That's exciting. You told me that while you were working for Ward Manufacturing in 1994, you designed a product related to natural gas that's still in use today. Can you describe that product to us a bit?
Yeah, many products die a natural death, and I've had some products that have lasted a long time. And I've designed a lot of products in my career, commercialized products. And I'll mention there's a big wall between commercialized products and ideas, even developed designs. There's a big wall. And commercial design is a different world than having good ideas. And that's where education come into play, because a lot of people have good ideas. But to take a good idea and make it real, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of detail, and it takes something beyond the pure pursuit of art in design. But there's a product I designed that won't seem to die. It's not a very attractive part. It's a part that's used to connect natural gas lines in outdoor applications. And it's, I don't know how old that is. That's 25 years or something like that ago. It's about 25 years, and it just won't go away. And I don't know why, but it's a part that's lived forever. And what's interesting is, I guess it's kind of basic. It's gone through regulatory testing and sometimes a regulatory environment can really resist change. So that comes into play there too. Whereas I've had some other really interesting products that either haven't come to market or have died quickly. And in fact, I was looking at one product. It was probably technically the most interesting thing I designed. It was a real high torque starting system for low temperature applications and so on. The whole technology got replaced with these electric motors and high capacity capacitors, and the whole thing just disappeared. So that's very humbling. It's very humbling. So design is a moving target usually.
Evolving as we speak.
Indeed.
Well, you did a very unique study that resulted in the design of a fishing boat to be used in the country of Malaysia. Can you tell us a little bit about what led to that project and describe that a bit for us? Why were you there? Why were you interested in this particular subject?
I was a visiting professor of mechanical engineering at University of Technology Malaysia in 2009, and there I did a fishing boat design, and it was one that was rooted in an ethnographic study largely. So it was combining technical understanding of boats and sort of gaining insights into a culture that was different than mine, which was why I was there. I was trying to use ethnographic techniques to infuse a design with appropriate elements. And it was really a fascinating study. I was there about 5 months with my family, and I studied boats. I went out fishing with the men offshore, worked with boat builders, and did a lot of the other pursuits in the world of boats and fishing. And what you see when you do things like that are things that you don't see on the printed page. For example, use of, well, no, I won't talk about that. Scratch that. Let's talk about use of drugs. I don't do that. I'll make friends. I'll just, there's not too much drugs. But anyway, scratch that. I was going down the wrong road. But the ethnographic study did reveal a lot of things. For example, there's a great affection for wood. And you say, well, why in the 21st century should people build boats out of wood? Well, the answer is really fascinating. It's because they don't have an effective Coast Guard. They don't have life rafts, so wood floats. So it's an intrinsically safe material for them to work at. In fact, one of the models I developed looked like it could be made out of metal. It was a more contemporary design. And when I did my study, that was one of the options as I tried to bracket things. And they generally did not like that because they thought it was metal and it would sink. So you find this sort of thing. And you also find out other complexities. If you make a boat work in all weather, so it's safer in heavy seas, that sounds good, but what happened is they would stay at home when the weather was bad, and that was attractive for a lot of reasons. So, and not only was that founded on ethnographic data, but you could look at certain measurable things like fish catches during bad weather, or certain technical aspects like we call scuppers or drain holes. You could triangulate your ethnographic data with this other hard data and really get some wonderful insights and some great texture to the experience that these fishermen had in these wooden boats. So my design then, I said, well, here's what I want, here's what they want, here's what they should have, and the real answer is somewhere in the middle.
Interesting. For, let's say we have a doodler, a young man who sits around and doodles boats. Explain how doing what you did to actually go into that culture, to immerse yourself in that culture, how did that result in a better design than you simply sitting at your desk and drawing a boat, as you could have done?
Yeah, field work is important in design because if you work in isolation, you don't have much help. And when we work in isolation, we can create things with wonderful beauty. And they're things that connect with our values and our experiences and our aesthetic interests and such. But in professional design, as opposed to professional doodling, we'll say, professional drawing, you have to get data, you have to get information that's outside of what you're used to. And a professional designer is designing for someone else. You're designing for the 4-year-old girl, you're designing for the 85-year-old man, you're designing for the athlete, you're designing for the quadriplegic, you're designing for all sorts of populations. So you have to get information on that, and you can't just go with your gut. If you go with your gut, you're likely to make mistakes. And design is a collaborative effort. It's not, often we assign names to a design because that seems to resonate with people. We sort of like a name connected with great things or great events. But design is very collaborative. So ethnographic studies, where you're going out and you're watching people, you're surveying people, you're getting data on what's actually happening with people's purchases and their behavior and such, is important because you can lay all that data out and say, this is what I see, this is what's happening, and here's the reasons for it. And it's not hard science, it's qualitative research, and that can be a tough nut to crack because you don't get the 6 decimal points and all that sort of thing. But you do get real data and you do get real conclusions, and they do have validity. And qualitative data, in our case we're talking about ethnographic data, lets you explore things that can't be explored in other ways. How do you find out what someone values? How do you get that? How do you find out what their dreams are for the future? How do you gauge their feeling of stability, their feeling of security? Those are things that are hard to gauge in any way but with qualitative research, with ethnographic methods. So literally in the case of this boat design, I had photographs of different features of the boats, I had a lot of survey data, I had economic data, and I literally laid it out on the floor, and there's processes by which you can go through to try to organize this data and say, you know what, this is what I'm seeing. And this is called grounded. I mean, one of the approaches is based in grounded theory research framework, which is saying the data drives the conclusions. So you're not coming in with a predisposed attitude about what people want. You're saying, I'm just going to look at the data and see what it tells me. And of course, this data is not necessarily numbers. So it's really fascinating work, and it's part of the art of design. And then you take that, you meld it with your own wonderful creative abilities, your own great desires to express beauty, and then you couple that with good engineering insights of the world of science and what really makes something work, and you put all that together, and you can end up with wonderful products that people enjoy.
What you've recently described almost makes designers sound like anthropologists in some ways. So what's the connection?
Well, design taps into it's interdisciplinary. Design is interdisciplinary, very much so. So there's an anthropologic element to it in the form of studying people. So when we hike up Borobudur or Teotihuacan or something like that, we're trying to connect with our past in a way. We're not just trying to climb up steps. And we're at the end of the day, we're human. We're not machines. We're not rooted fully in the scientific process. We have we have attitudes, we have emotions and such that are hard to articulate. So that's where the designer has to act like an anthropologist and say, what's really going on, to the extent that you can determine it. I mean, there's certain walls that you hit and you have to say, I can't go further, I don't see over this wall. Or you can say, I have certain biases. My positionality with respect to this population or this thing I'm pursuing is such that I can't really be honest in my appraisal. So you have this kind of academic stuff that comes into play that tries to keep you from going with gut feels, and I read a magazine article and it said, and that kind of shallow study. So anthropology is one of the sciences that we tap into, or disciplines, I should say.
So design can be like going on an adventure in many ways.
Well, it is. You're trying to experience someone else's journey. And in fact, we use something called a journey map, which is a process by where we study people. We sketch out basically a comic strip, a chronologically based sequence of events. What's it like to go to a store and buy broccoli? What is that experience like? What's it like to drive into the parking lot and park your car and open the door and get a cart and find it and check out and all that sort of thing? And that's one. There's many formal design tools. That's one of them. So it is an adventure. You're walking in someone else's footsteps for a long time, and you're really trying to get intimate with it in a deep way. And clients, again, looking at the professional side, they appreciate that. When you say, here's the problems we see with your product right now, or the experience that you're offering right now, here's the problems. And when they see that you can empathize with their situation, you've got a real audience. They're saying, these people know what they're talking about, or this person knows what they're talking about. And then the design flows from that. Because obviously, if you don't realize that people are having a problem with something, you can't design around it. And then that's where the element of surprise. When you give someone something they don't expect, that's a delightful consequence of walking that journey.
Another thing that you do with your students, in addition to your gathering data and sketching out ideas, is you bring clay modeling into the education. What does that add to the design process, the modeling with clay?
Designers use a lot of media, and we use any media we can get our hands on. And it can be digital. We can work in the digital world, and we do that all the time. But we use clay as an adjunct sometimes. And the reason we do that is we're human. We like to see things become created in front of our eyes by using our hands and our fingers to manipulate things. And clay is a very good medium for that, because it's easy to work, and there's all kinds of tricks you can do to make things quickly. It's sort of an unpretentious material too. When you look at it, people don't say, wow, that's really a shiny looking thing, which I could do in digital rendering. It's sort of the blob of clay. So the form, the basic shape speaks. It's not the beauty of the finish or the paint or any other embellishments. It's really the form. Does this form work? But there's no rule books. Kids play with clay. It's intuitive. It's very good for ethnographic work, because you can get the people that you're studying to work with clay too, because there's not much involved with it. So it can be at the low end, is sort of like a kid with clay making basic flower pots and such. It can rise to a level of sophistication which is very high. You can put metal foil on it and make a beautiful piece of sculpture with clay. I would say in design, we're somewhere in the middle. We're not trying to make art, but we're trying to make serious sculptings.
Do you think that using those kind of resources that are less intimidating, crayons and markers and pencils and clay, does that open up some part of our brain that lets us think more creatively?
Well, media is really important for expressing yourself. In other words, right now we have 1,000 thoughts in our mind. They're bouncing around, and they're wonderful thoughts. But they're sort of unprocessed, and you think, well, there's a novel buried back there somewhere, there's a nice story in there, there's a poem, there's a great painting. All this stuff is bouncing around in our mind as we try to breathe and chew gum at the same time. But when you try to share that with people, you need to put it out in a public way. You need to draw it or in some form or sculpt it. And so the basics, the crayons, the charcoal, the pencil, that lets you share the idea. And not just with others, but also with yourself. So you can see what things look like, and you can get that whole process of ideating down where you look at a drawing and you say, well, what if I do this, that, or the other thing? But it lets you share with other people. So for everyone that likes to design, you have to grab that Crayola. You got to grab that pencil. You got to get a piece of paper and just draw, draw, draw. It's a beautiful thing.
In an academic study of your project, your boat project, you wrote, successful design often requires an insightful blend of technology, marketing, cultural understanding, and aesthetic sensitivity. How does a person develop that kind of a multifaceted expertise? It sounds really big. How, in a few years of study, does a student become an expert in all those things?
The interdisciplinary nature of design is really pretty natural for people. People are very sophisticated. They understand the breadth and depth of the human experience very well. It's not necessarily something you learn from a teacher or a certain situation. To get through this world, you have to interpret people, and we can do that really well. You have to interpret environments. You have to interpret how people are feeling about you as you're talking. You get that real-time feedback, and we're experts at it. It's not really a textbook thing. So incorporating those elements into design is simply saying, do it. Take that wonderful experience that you have intuitively and bring it into the design. Don't make it a math equation, don't make it a science project. Bring it into the design. If you create some element of your design that's whimsical or doesn't make sense to many people, but it makes sense to you, bring it in, because it's part of that whole broad-based interdisciplinary approach to design. You're saying that, kids like certain colors. Kids like whimsy. Kids like wonder. Kids like magic and surprise, and pull that in. Yeah, you don't need it to make the thing work, but it's fun, and that's part of it. And grown-ups are the same way.
How do your students develop a visual language that really helps them be successful and then interpret that into the world of work?
The visual vocabulary is important. It's the language of the trade. So there's many formal elements that you see connected with that, which you learn again in an academic setting. Here's these words, here's what they mean, and they mean the same to everyone. And what you're trying to do is communicate visuals, in many cases, through words. And that's always tough. So that's where visual vocabulary comes in and the language associated with that. However, it can go deeper. If you look at, again, with brand, you're saying brand identity is connected with certain emotions and certain themes, and you get this kind of odd language developed in connection with that. So you'll say, for example, these statements are true for this brand. And you see these little taglines at McDonald's and things like that. These are things that we value. And you try to incorporate those into three-dimensional objects. And that's sort of a tough road, but you try. It's part of that mix, along with all those other things that we described previously.
When you worked in industry and when your students go out and work in industry, who are some of the key people in terms of other positions they might work? Who are the people that they're collaborating with in order to do their job well?
In the typical business environment, marketing often initiates a lot of design. It's not always that way, but that's often their job, and that can take many, many forms. It can take one person having a viewpoint, or it can be some sort of survey data. It can range from that. But designers are working with marketing people, and they're working with engineers, and working with manufacturing. I mean, that's typically the group that you're connected with. Of course, you might be connected with sales and other people like that as well, but you're motivated by the market, typically. You're kept down to earth by the engineers and the manufacturing people, and you work between that. And that's good. I mean, if you make something that can't be made easily, it's not just that it's hard to make, but there's an economic and an ecological impact. If you're creating a lot of scrap material, if you're using huge resources to make something that you don't need to, that's got these kind of downstream ramifications.
Can you describe the engineering design process in kind of simple terms that an elementary school student could understand? What's the process? Yeah,
the design process can kind of come down to a handful of steps. It comes down principally to identifying the problem. What are you trying to solve? And there's another part to that. Sometimes you create something and you look for something that it can. I didn't say that right. Let me scratch.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me get a drink. Because I was thinking about that inventiveness versus design.
Okay.
All right. I don't have context. My eyes bother me by that light.
It might be
That's right.
light, yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. Only a few more questions. You're
okay.
almost
All right.
there.
Good. All right.
You're
Great.
almost there.
Okay. The design process can be broken down into a handful of parts. And first, you have to look at inventing versus designing. The process of inventing is saying, "Here's a really neat idea. What can I do with it?" Design can be a little different. It can start with identifying a problem. Here's a problem that has to be solved. And then it can move to brainstorming or ideation, where you come up with a lot of solutions and you try to go all over the place with these solutions. And then you refine that. You take all these ideas and you say, okay, we're going to vet these out and say, these make sense and these don't. And you get a smaller pool of that. And then once you have a basic design approach, you do sort of the direct engineering work. You make sure that it doesn't break, that it will last as long as you want it to, that it doesn't corrode, that it will actually do what it's intended to do. And then you go to manufacturing. Those are the basic design steps.
We've alluded to the fact that mathematics plays an important role in design and engineering, but sometimes students are intimidated by math, or they feel they just can't do well in math. What kind of advice would you give to a young student who's interested in design and likes that, but just isn't really convinced that they can do the math?
Yeah. Math often presents a roadblock for students, and math is an interesting pursuit. For designers, math is a tool. We don't do math in some sort of academic sense, but we use math, and we use it in a powerful way. We use it statistically to get information on human dimensions. So we look at statistics to kind of discern what sizes our products need to be, or we use statistics to get information on the marketplace. But also we use algebraic concepts when we try to understand the science that undergirds our designs. So math is a wonderful tool for communicating abstract notions. So if you're talking about, will something break? What are the situations that would cause something to break? The most efficient way to communicate that is often mathematically. So I can offer a long paragraph, a long page of reading, or I can give you a couple math equations that describe it much more eloquently. So designers shouldn't be afraid of math. They should embrace math and say, you know what, it's one of my tools, and I've got a lot of them.
You have a group of students working at GE's Tech Solutions Center in Lewistown. You're going to go there tomorrow and visit on those. Can you tell us how the students happen to get this opportunity and what kind of projects they're working on with the company?
Right, we're working with a company in Lewistown where they contacted us, as it turns out, which was good, and it's an accolade for the marketing department here. But they contacted us and they said, we would like to work with industrial designers on some of their products. And I thought that was a great idea. And this project we've done a couple projects, and they're very appealing because they connect the students with real projects, with a real industry, with a real market, with real issues, and you have to pull all these things onto the reservation, so to speak, in terms of getting the project done. So what I saw in that is there was a need. There was a company, there was a need for design work. Not the technical engineering aspects of it. I mean, there's a lot of that, not all of that, but actually making the thing work. And it's a big step to go from a technology or an idea to actually making something that works and that people will spend money to buy and maybe even enjoy using.
What do you think the students are gaining from that kind of experience outside of the classroom into the industry itself?
The students recognize the difference between the classroom and the real world. And we realize that. And when we pretend that that doesn't exist, we're fooling ourselves. So if a student is meeting with the client and they have a real need and they have real constraints, they realize it's not a textbook problem and therefore pursue the design with greater constraint, greater vigor, and you end up with a much better product. And also, too, like in this case with a local customer, they've invited us to see some of their facilities and see some people actually using this product, and the students are very thrilled by that because they feel like they're part of the group. They feel empowered. They feel like they're really making a contribution. Because if somebody's going to spend money on them to get them a hotel room and get them transportation and feed them and such, they realize that which they're doing is important, and that's really something that's hard for educators to do in the same fashion. We don't like to give students cash. We give grades.
Why do you think it's important for teachers and people in the industry to work together? What kind of impact do you think that's going to have on these individual students' careers? in the future? What impact does that have on our society when we're working together in that way?
Well, working with industry should be the standard for any kind of educational pursuit. It's what I went through. I went through a program like that. It really grounds you, and it gives you an experience that you might never be able to replicate. Because usually when you're working in industry, you might be working with other students. That's the model we have. And so you get this interesting group of young, idealistic, energetic, but inexperienced students working on a really neat project, but they're all together, and they can share things beyond just the project. They can share their sort of vocational interests and their fears and all that sort of thing. So you get this interesting community that develops. But the best thing that industry does is they keep things real. They keep it grounded. It's not an abstract pursuit of something. It's real and tangible, and we have a real hard time replicating that.
Very good. You're going to do some more conversation next week about the makers movement,
Yes.
but I know you've made a proposal to the administration about makerspace here at the college. Why do you think this movement is happening now, and why is this why should we have makerspace here on this campus? What's the fit?
Well, makerspace is a wonderful environment where you're with like-minded people that like to create things. And the reason the maker movement is popular and growing is that people love to create. It's what humans do. We create things. And if you think of our response to the internet, the information age, often we get information from other people. The content that we gain is often other people's experiences. And I've had some interesting experiences of my own where I'm interested in doing some kind of testing or building of something, and I do a Google search and I find somebody's already done it, and I watch a bunch of videos, and I no longer have that challenge because I've seen so many other people do it. So humans love the unknown. We love to explore and invent and create. And a makerspace is saying, what if? What if? What if I build this? What's going to happen? What if I do this? And I talk to other people and they say, well, what if? And what if? And why don't we try this? And wow, that's cool, look what happened. And I didn't expect that. And it's all that stuff. And it's physical. It's not clicking a mouse button. It's not tapping on a keyboard. It's physical. It's real. You can have all kinds of funny experiences happen. You can have, well, I won't mention some of them, but you can have all sorts of interesting things. So it's people working with their minds and their hands as they've done forever.
Good. You think of anything else?
Can you start off, can you just give a quick definition of industrial design?
The best definition I've seen for industrial design is industrial designer is an artist, a mechanic, and an engineer.
What's the biggest challenge for the industrial design discipline today?
Yeah, one of the challenges in industrial design is moving it from beyond art to the world of real and applied products and experiences and systems. Industrial design goes beyond products. It actually is connecting human interests to a variety of things, such as experiences. So industrial designers can design experiences as well. They can work in the virtual world as well. So when you interact with a website, there's elements of that fall under the realm of industrial design. Industrial design contains such disciplines as ergonomics and kinesiology and mechanical engineering and ethnography, and contains many different disciplines within it. But so probably the biggest challenge, though, is to move it beyond art, because if you just make pretty pictures, you can't make a living doing that. You have to move beyond the pretty pictures. So it's sort of enjoying the artistic pursuits, embracing the artistic pursuits, but then moving into these other areas that can be challenging for some people, like the math that you mentioned.
I guess I'm thinking more, maybe more bigger picture. Like for the world. Like not everybody can afford Apple products in the world. Industrial design has a place in making the world a better place.
Yeah, even developing countries, why do they need industrial design, those kinds of things. What's the effect on civilization of industrial design?
Whoa.
Let's go.
Get another drink of water.
Go big or go home, right?
Well, the big picture aspects of industrial design are kind of included under the democratization of design, which is saying that where you can, you should make designs approachable by everyone in the world, all sorts of economic circumstances. So you can design things that are inexpensive, and there's some really wonderful and sustainable designs that are inexpensive. And so industrial designers can say, in whatever country, this is how much money they can spend on light bulbs. Or in this country, they can't spend any money on light bulbs or refrigeration or whatever the product that you're interested in pursuing. So you say, what can you come up with? And so these kind of low-tech solutions can really have great impact. And there are a lot of examples of them where when you look at them, you might not be that impressed because they don't have a lot of technical sophistication or a lot of glitz, but they work and they can be produced by indigenous materials. One of the projects I'm working on, it connects with this boat project in Malaysia, is they use these huge timbers from old growth hardwoods to make the keels. And it's with this wood called chengal, which is a lot like teak. It's really good wood. It lasts forever. It's a dense, hard-grained wood they can carve and do all the things they've done for centuries with, but they can't get it anymore. It's very hard to get, and they don't want to shift away from it because they're used to it. It floats. They can interface with their other things, and I really want to replace the huge timbers. In other words, I've been working on a model whereby they can use a lot of wood in the way that they always have, but these huge timbers would be made from something else, and that's a goal I personally that I'm pursuing. So sometimes you get a hybrid. You can say, well, we can't fix everything, but we can make these little, small impacts that hopefully in the end help out a great deal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good.
Just one other question. Like, what jobs are available besides just being a designer? Do students come out of your major in sales? Or?
Yeah, and we're new, but I can comment on that. The world of design can go beyond designing physical things. There's the notion of design thinking is in play right now, and designers, by their academic study, are used to working through disciplines. So they can work very well as managers. They can work very well even in the marketing world too. But if you look at design thinking, which is saying how do you solve a problem in an interdisciplinary way, using an empathetic approach to your customer, that applies very well to management and many other disciplines.
So these students really have potential to advance as well, I would
Yes.
think. Yeah.
Like, we talked about a lot of different things today, but if there was one thing or two main things you would want a viewer to take away from everything we talked about, what would it be?
The most interesting part of design is that it's very human. It comes to you naturally. And very often when kids are going through the school system, little walls can be thrown up. And they're not really thrown up, that's not quite fair, but there can be obstacles, that's a better way to say it. They encounter some math problem that they can't solve, or some science topic that they can't do, or some art project that they're dissatisfied with. Well, design is saying, that's all right. You have abilities in a lot of different areas, tap into them. And if you're willing to tap into all those abilities and keep learning about the things that you might be weak in, embrace technology, embrace science, embrace math, embrace art, put them all together and create wonderful things, that's the best part of design. It's very human. There's no instruction manual required for the most part. One of the things that's unique with design that people don't appreciate is everything you touch has been designed with a lot of detail. And I was always amazed myself when I would be working on a product, I'd worry about every single element of that. And I don't think people appreciate that. Even sort of pedestrian things, like a lamp stand or a pencil holder. Somebody's worried about everything on there: the texture, the color, the material, the radii, the weight of it, the proportion, the balance, all that sort of thing has been worried about. And that's really neat.
It is.
And you just go to Target and buy it.
I know. Even you think in our lifetime, what a sneaker looked like when we were kids, as compared to the options for sneakers that you'll find today.
Right.
Brought about by design, technology changes, all those kinds of. It was just cover your foot basically before.
Right. Well, now you're getting customization of colors, which is new. So you can make the Nike swoosh go away if you want, which is really interesting. So color used to be a big well, it still is a part of brand identity, but you can change it, and that's really new. That's a very new change in consumer
and building up the
retail.
arch, or building, doing different things for
Yes.
different sneaker for a different activity. Like
Yes.
who would have thought?
I know,
when I was a
thought
kid,
that,
that you
right.
would have had a different sneaker for
But that
running
doesn't-
and for tennis and
It
for.
does induce a level of stress, though, doesn't it? Sometimes you just want a sandwich. You don't care what it is. You're just hungry. You want a sandwich.
That's right. Too many
You just want a
choices.
shoe.
Too many choices.
I know, too many choices. Right. Right. And it's absolutely true.
yeah.
And information technology has been
That's
a
what our
challenge.
wealth has brought us, right? I mean, because if you think, you're talking about the
Yeah.
third world country, developing countries, I think of the shoe, is it the Toms or the Bobs or whatever, shoes that were developed, just because in developing countries they didn't have shoes. So let's get a basic, cheap shoe that we can provide.
Right. I remember seeing them made out of tires and all sorts of materials. And that makes sense, because what do you do with tires?
Right.
They're a problem. So if you make them into shoes, that's a good
Let's
thing.
use them to solve another problem. So
Yeah. And there's a lot of complexities. Like there was a lot of the garbage pickers burn, in a lot of countries, will burn plastic for heat. And plastic is a really bad thing to burn. It produces all sorts of nasty things. But they do it. So the question is, do you design a stove that's more efficient in the way it burns plastic? Is that good or bad? Or will that incite people to burn more plastic? And then maybe sell your little machine, you know what I mean? You can, So you have all these unintended consequences that arise, and that's part of design too. And very often, especially in some of those pursuits for designs for the developing world, they get it wrong, because there's often the notion that we know better than they do, and that's a real problem. We come in there saying, we'll solve
do
your
it our
problem
way,
for you.
yeah.
And we don't have a clue.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Good. It sounds like we have to be willing to take risks. So is there something that you would say to students to help, and I'm sure you do say things to students, to help them get over that kind of fear of failure, to be willing to make a mistake in order to improve the process?
The fear of failure is something we all contend with. And in academic treatments of design, you critique designs. So you put all your designs up, and they're reviewed by your peers and by faculty, and there's a process by which we recognize we've all made mistakes. Here's the mistakes that we see, and here's how you can correct them. One of the challenges with, we'll say, the more artistic side of design, though, is that mistakes are hard to articulate because it can be very subjective. So you can say, this does not seem to be a repetitive pattern within your whole product. And you can use sort of formal design language, and the person can say, well, I'm interrupting the repetitive pattern to highlight this point. So you can kind of banter back and forth in this, but you have a shared language. So the fear of failure is what school's about. Come here and learn from your mistakes, learn from my mistakes, learn from your colleagues' mistakes, and grow from them.
When you're interacting with students, and then they do make mistakes, but how do you express to them in a way that says, you're going to learn from this mistake, and your product is going to be better? I mean, we all hear the stories of Edison's failures and Einstein's failures, and we know that's all part of. So how do you get students to embrace that idea that this isn't something I can't overcome, or this is a reason to quit? This is a reason for me to keep going.
Well, students can be motivated to overcome fears of failure in several different ways. And one of the most helpful ways is to put them with a cohort, with other students, because they're walking that path together. Another technique that I employ is you design a lot. And if you're designing a lot, you're making a lot of drawings, then you don't have time to overanalyze things. You design, and you recognize that not all your designs are good, and so on. So that's some ways that you can overcome the fear of failure. But what happens is, when you work with groups, with a cohort, you get this kind of odd occurrence where good ideas get generated by the group, and you're not really sure where they came from, and it's a very interesting process to watch. So working in isolation can be tough, because you can think you have a great idea and you don't. So working with groups really does help overcome fear of failure.
Hi everyone, it's Chris again. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with industrial design professor Tom Ask. Just a quick reminder, this interview was conducted as part of our first Working Class episode titled Dream and Do, which focuses on design-related careers. Check out the Working Class TV show at workingclass.tv and on demand at wvia.org. For more information on industrial design and a lot of other majors, check out Penn College's website at pct.edu. Teachers, you can check out the Working Class TV website for lesson guides. You can follow us on Twitter at workingclass_TV. Let us know what you think about the podcast. We'll be back again soon with another great conversation. Thanks for listening.